At 1:14 on a Tuesday morning, I learned exactly how much my son believed my life was worth: $890,000. That was the number my daughter-in-law whispered into her phone while I stood barefoot outside my study, holding a glass of water I had forgotten to drink. The realtor says the house should bring at least $890, Paige said. My son, Colin, lowered his voice. Dad won't sell. He won't have to. There was a pause, followed by the soft tapping of Paige's fingernail against the desk Miriam had chosen 32 years earlier. Once he's settled at Meadow Ridge, we'll list it, she said. We tell him the money is paying for his care. After the entrance fee, there should still be more than $700,000 left. Colin did not ask whether I wanted to leave. He did not remind his wife that the house belonged to me. He asked only one question. How long would we have to wait before we could use the rest? Miriam and I had spent 41 years paying for that house. We raised Colin there. We buried a dog beneath the maple tree, measured our son's height against the pantry door, and danced in the kitchen the morning the final mortgage payment cleared. 14 months after Miriam died. Colin and Paige moved in because they said I should not be alone. I thought they had come to save me from the silence. They had come because they thought silence made me easy to move. I could have opened the study door and confronted them. Instead, I walked back to my bedroom without drinking the water. The next morning, I made breakfast for the two people planning to remove me from my own life. Then, at exactly 9:05, I called a lawyer and asked how quickly a competent man could sell a house no one else owned, to understand why I did not confront them that night. You need to understand what their arrival had meant to me. Grief did not make my house feel haunted. It made it feel unfinished. Miriam's gardening gloves remained on a shelf beside the back door. Her half of the closet still held 3 dresses I could not bring myself to move. The kitchen clock continued losing 4 minutes every month because she had always reset it. And after she died, I discovered I would rather live 4 minutes behind the world than touch the small dial she had touched. People visited during the first weeks. They brought casseroles, flowers, and soft voices. Then life called them back. By the 6th month, Sunday dinner meant 1 plate, 1 glass, and the television speaking from the next room so I did not have to hear myself chew. Colin called every few days. He asked whether I had eaten and whether the furnace was behaving. Paige sent articles about grief and offered to drive me to appointments. I was grateful for every call, even the hurried ones. Then Colin found me on a ladder cleaning the gutter. He stood in the driveway with both hands raised, as if I were on the edge of a roof instead of 6 feet above the ground. Dad, you can't keep doing this alone. I climbed down and told him I had cleaned those gutters since before he could walk. That's the point, Paige said. You shouldn't have to anymore. They told me their house needed repairs and the mortgage payments were becoming harder to manage. The drive between us also made it difficult to help me. Paige suggested they move into my 2 unused bedrooms for a while. Colin could handle maintenance. Paige could take me to medical appointments. I would have company, and they could save money while deciding what to do with their own property. It sounded like a solution in which everyone received something they needed. The first evening after they moved in, Paige cooked Miriam's pot roast recipe from a card she found in the kitchen drawer. It did not taste exactly the same, but I ate 2 servings because the table had voices around it again. Colin repaired the loose section of fence. Paige drove me to an eye examination and waited in the lobby. On Sundays, she invited her sister or one of Colin's cousins. The house filled with shoes near the door and coffee cups on the sideboard. For the first time after Miriam's death, I stopped dreading the evening. That gratitude delayed my suspicion. For nearly 2 months, I defended them to myself. When Colin reorganized my workshop without asking, I told myself he wanted to make the tools safer. When Paige replaced the handwritten calendar, Miriam had always kept with an application on her phone. I accepted the change because she began reminding me about appointments. When they invited relatives for Sunday dinner, I ignored the way Paige answered questions directed at me because the table was full and I was tired of eating alone. One Sunday, my nephew asked whether I planned to travel again. Miriam and I had once talked about taking a train across Canada after retirement. Frank doesn't do well with complicated schedules now, Paige said. I set down my fork. Frank is sitting beside you. She touched my shoulder and laughed as if I had made a joke. Then Frank can tell us himself. The conversation had already moved on. At my next medical appointment, Paige carried a folder into the examination room. Before the doctor could ask why I was there, she described me as forgetful, unsteady, and resistant to help. I came because my blood pressure prescription needs renewal, I said. The doctor turned back to me. He asked whether I had fallen, become lost, missed payments, or left appliances running. I answered no to all four. Paige opened her yellow pad. He misplaced his keys twice last month. You moved them, I said, because you leave them in unsafe places. The bowl beside my front door is not unsafe. The doctor asked Paige to wait outside while he completed the examination. She smiled as she left, but her mouth had tightened. Afterward, she called my insistence on privacy embarrassing. I am trying to advocate for you, she said in the car. Advocates speak for people who ask them to. That attitude is exactly why families have to plan before a crisis. It was the first time she used the word crisis when nothing had happened. Colin's questions became more technical. He wanted to know when the roof had been replaced, whether the electrical panel met current standards, and how much the property taxes had risen. As a former electrical engineer and municipal maintenance manager, I had records for every major repair. He photographed the folder without asking. For insurance, he said. Whose insurance? He put the phone back into his pocket. Ours, as a household. There was no ours on the policy. Paige asked about my will 3 nights later. She presented the question as concern about probate, then wanted to know whether Colin was still executor. Your mother and I arranged everything with an attorney. Plans get outdated. So do questions when they have been answered. She stared at me, surprised by the edge in my voice. Then she apologized and brought me tea. By dinner, she behaved as if the question had never been asked. Paige began collecting the mail before I reached the box. At first, she placed it neatly beside my chair. Then she started opening anything she considered household business. I was sorting the insurance from the junk, she explained. When I found my property tax notice already unfolded, I told her I had sorted my own mail for 50 years. She laughed and kissed my cheek. And now you have help. Colin asked whether the deed had passed automatically into my name when Miriam died. I said it had. 2 days later, Paige wanted to know whether the mortgage was completely paid. Why? I asked. We're trying to understand your monthly expenses. I didn't ask you to. Her smile remained in place. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protection became the word they used whenever they wanted something I had not offered. My car keys began disappearing from the bowl near the door. Paige said she had moved them so I would not drive when I was tired. Colin started taking over small repairs before I could reach my tools. If I forgot why I entered a room, Paige watched me with the careful expression people use around cracked glass. Once, I left a grocery list inside the refrigerator. Miriam and I had laughed about mistakes like that for decades. Paige wrote it down on a yellow pad. What are you doing? I asked. Nothing. Just keeping track of things for your next checkup. The first Meadow Ridge brochure appeared on the kitchen counter 3 weeks before the phone call. It showed 2 silver-haired people walking beside a pond under a blue sky. Inside were photographs of a dining room, a fitness center, and apartments furnished in colors no human being had ever chosen for himself. A friend's mother lives there, Paige said. She loves it. I'm pleased for her. You should at least look. At what? Options. I put the brochure beneath a stack of newspapers. The following week, it returned to the center of the table with one page folded open to the section on supervised living. Colin began calling my home unsafe. The front steps were too steep. The upstairs bedroom was too far from the bathroom. The basement stairs needed another railing. Every flaw he had ignored while growing up became evidence that I no longer belonged there. At a family dinner, Paige told my niece that I had become a little uncertain since Miriam died. She said it kindly, in front of me. While touching my arm, I corrected her. "I am lonely, Paige. That is not the same as uncertain." "Of course not," she said, but my niece began speaking to me more slowly. The night I overheard the call, I had gone to bed early. Paige believed I was asleep because she had brought me tea at 10 and found my light off. I woke thirsty after 1 and walked toward the kitchen. The study door stood almost closed. A narrow line of light crossed the hallway floor. Paige was speaking to someone on the phone. At first, I heard only fragments: recent sales, original woodwork, 5 bedrooms. Quick closing, then came the number. $890,000. She was speaking to a realtor, not the one I would later hire, but someone willing to estimate a house for people who did not own it. Colin said I would never agree to sell. Paige answered that I did not have to believe the move was permanent. They would describe Meadow Ridge as a short trial after a health assessment. Once I was settled, they would list the house and tell me the sale proceeds were necessary to pay for my care. "The entrance package is between $120,000 and $150,000, she said. "Even after fees, there is enough to stop the foreclosure, clear the business loans, and put a down payment on something smaller." That was the first time I knew they were facing foreclosure. Colin asked about taxes. Paige answered with estimates. They discussed commissions, moving costs, and how much cash would remain after I had been deposited at Meadow Ridge, like a piece of furniture that required monthly storage. They had not discussed whether I would be happy there. They had discussed what would remain after I was deposited. Then Paige mentioned the financial power of attorney. "The care consultant says we can present it as part of the transition plan," she said. "If he signs before the assessment, we can manage the account and the closing." "What if he reads it?" Colin asked. "Frank trusts you." Those 3 words hurt more than the number. Colin was quiet, Paige continued. She had already completed an admission inquiry with Meadow Ridge. An assessment appointment had been requested. She was keeping notes about every misplaced key, forgotten word, and repeated question. She had told relatives I was no longer safe living alone, even though I had not been alone since they moved in. "We are doing what he needs," she said. "Frank doesn't need a 5-bedroom house. He needs supervision." Colin finally spoke. It was going to be mine eventually. "There are sentences a father spends years teaching his son never to say. Not through lectures, but through packed lunches, hospital nights, tuition checks. And every quiet example of the difference between loving something and claiming it. My son said that sentence. Anyway, I stepped away from the door before they could hear me breathe. In my bedroom, Miriam's photograph stood beside the clock. I sat on the edge of the bed until the line of light beneath the study door disappeared. I did not sleep. At 6:30, I made coffee. Paige entered wearing the robe I had given Miriam on our 35th anniversary, because she liked the color and said there was no reason for it to remain unused. "You're up early," she said. "I slept enough." Colin came down 10 minutes later. I asked how he wanted his eggs. He looked relieved by the ordinary question. Over easy, I cooked them exactly that way. Then I waited for the house to empty. At 8:45, Paige left for work. Colin followed 20 minutes later after reminding me not to drive until he checked the tire pressure. At 9:05, I called Leah Morgan. I had met Leah 6 years earlier when Miriam and I updated our wills. She practiced elder law and property law, which meant she had heard the word protection used by people with very different intentions. Her assistant offered me an appointment the following week. I said my son was planning to place me in supervised living, obtain a financial power of attorney, and sell my home without my consent. Leah saw me at 11:30. I brought the deed, my will, bank records, and the red mortgage ledger Miriam had kept for 41 years. I did not bring evidence of the conversation because I had no recording. I brought my memory of it, written down as soon as Colin and Paige left. Leah read my notes without interrupting. "Have you signed any power of attorney naming Colin or Paige?" she asked. "No." "Are either of them on the deed?" "No." "Do they contribute rent under a written lease?" "No. They buy groceries sometimes. I let them move in as family." "Have you been diagnosed with any condition affecting your judgment?" "No." She folded her hands. "Then we begin with facts, not fear. You remain the owner. They cannot sell the house merely because they expect to inherit it. They cannot sign for you without authority, and a care inquiry does not decide where you live." "Can I make them leave?" "Yes, but we do it lawfully. Family occupants can still acquire legal protections depending on how long they have lived there and where the property is located. We will identify their status, give the required notice, and document every step. I don't only want them to leave." Leah waited. "I want to sell the house." It was the first time I had said the decision aloud. Until that moment, it had felt like a weapon I had picked up in anger. Hearing it in Leah's quiet office made it sound like a door. "Why sell rather than remove them?" she asked. "Because if I keep it, they will keep waiting. Maybe not inside it, but around it. Every repair will be something they believe I am subtracting from them. Every year I live there will be another year I am withholding what they have already divided." "And what do you want?" That question stopped me. For 14 months, people had asked what I needed: meals, rides, help with the yard. No one had asked what I wanted because grief made desire seem impolite. "I want to choose the next place before someone chooses it for me." Leah nodded. "Then you do not need their permission to sell your house, Frank. You only need the patience to do it legally." Before we discussed listings or notices, she insisted that I see my physician for a voluntary capacity assessment. Paige had begun building a story about mental decline. Leah wanted a neutral medical record created before any contract was signed. "A doctor does not give you permission to control your property," she explained. "But a current evaluation makes it harder for someone to rewrite a deliberate decision as confusion later." She also ordered a new title search, placed alerts against unauthorized filings, and arranged for financial mail to go to a secure post office box. We updated my power of attorney, medical proxy, executor designation, and will. Colin had been named as the person who would manage my finances if I became unable to do so. I removed him. The house and the sale proceeds would pass into a trust used for my retirement, health care, and living expenses. A small education provision for any future grandchildren would be independently managed. Colin and Paige would have no authority over it. When I returned home, Paige had left another Meadow Ridge brochure beside my plate. Colin asked where I had been. "Running errands." "You drove?" "It is my car." His jaw tightened. "We're trying to keep you safe." "Then begin by remembering I am still allowed to go outside." I carried the red ledger upstairs. Miriam had bought it from an office supply store during the first month of our mortgage. Its cover had faded from dark red to the color of dried leaves. Every payment appeared inside in her narrow handwriting. Date, amount, remaining balance along the margins. She recorded the life that happened between those numbers. Colin took his first steps today. Furnace failed. No vacation this summer. Frank worked 3 Saturdays. Paid extra toward principal. Hospital bill arrived. We will manage. The house had cost us more than money. It had cost weekends, trips, newer cars, and hundreds of small choices no one else remembered. We bought it when I was 29 and Miriam was 27. It had 5 bedrooms because we imagined filling them with children. We had only Colin, but the empty rooms never felt wasted. One became Miriam's sewing room, One held my electrical diagrams and tools. Another held relatives during holidays and neighbors after winter storms knocked out power across the district. The brass key came with the front door. Miriam tied a blue ribbon through it so we would not confuse it with the apartment key we still carried during the move. A key is not a prize, she told me. It is a promise that someone is responsible for what happens behind the door. When Colin was a boy, we marked his height on the pantry frame every birthday. At 16, he complained that the marks were childish. At 30, he placed his hand beside the highest one and asked why we had never painted over them. "Because you happened here," Miriam said. The maple tree had been little more than a stick when we planted it. It outgrew the roof, survived 2 storms, and shaded the patch of earth where our old dog, Chester, was buried. Colin knew every one of those stories. That was why his sentence kept returning. It was going to be mine eventually. He saw the house as the last number in Miriam's ledger. I saw every line above it. For several hours, I believed selling would betray her. We had worked 41 years to own the place free of debt. What kind of husband sold it 14 months after his wife died? Then I reached the final pages. The entry from the last payment was written in blue ink. Paid in full after 41 years. Still ours because we chose it every day. Below it, Miriam had added a sentence I did not remember seeing. "Frank, never confuse protecting the house with allowing the house to trap you." I read it twice. On the inside back cover, she had copied something she had told me after a long argument with Colin years earlier. A house is only a home while no one inside it is made to feel like a guest. Colin and Paige had moved into my home and slowly made me ask permission to drive, open my mail, repair my fence, and reject a brochure. I had become the guest. Selling no longer felt like abandoning what Miriam and I had built. The capacity assessment took place 3 days later. My physician referred me to a specialist who tested memory, reasoning, financial understanding, and my ability to explain the consequences of a sale. I found parts of it irritating, which the specialist said was not unusual for a competent person being asked whether he knew what year it was. The written conclusion was clear. I understood my property, my finances, the people who might benefit, the alternatives available, and the consequences of my choices. There was no evidence that I lacked decision-making capacity. Paige asked about the appointment when she saw the medical envelope. "Routine checkup," I said. "You should let me attend those." "No." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her. I visited Meadow Ridge alone the following afternoon. I did not tell Colin or Paige. Leah believed I should understand the place they had chosen for me, both because it might reveal what information Paige had supplied, and because a decision made from knowledge would be harder to misrepresent than one made from anger. Meadow Ridge was not a prison. That mattered. The lobby was bright. 2 residents were arguing cheerfully over a chessboard. A woman near my age was teaching a painting class, and the dining room smelled better than the brochure suggested. Some people would have been happier and safer there than in an isolated house they could no longer maintain. That did not make it my home. An admissions coordinator named Helen met me in a small office. When I gave my name, she found an inquiry Paige had submitted. The form described me as a widower with progressing memory loss, resistance to supervision, and a probable need for financial oversight. It listed Paige as the primary family contact and Colin as the person expected to manage my funds. Did either of them state that they held legal authority? I asked. The inquiry says documents are pending. They are not pending. They do not exist. Helen closed the file. Then nothing can proceed without your consent or a lawful finding that someone else has authority. If I chose to live here, who would control the proceeds from selling my house? You would, unless you validly appointed someone. I asked Helen to record that I had appeared voluntarily, understood the services, declined admission, and had not authorized Paige to speak for me. She agreed. Before I left, I sat beside the pond from the brochure. It was real, although the sky above it was gray rather than blue. A resident fed crumbs to ducks while his daughter read beside him. I could imagine choosing a place like Meadow Ridge someday. I simply had not chosen it now, and Paige had no right to complete that choice for me. She began pushing Meadow Ridge more aggressively. A care consultant called the house asking to confirm an assessment Paige had requested. I told the woman I had not requested anything and asked her to note that clearly. I did not cancel the possibility of a visit. Leah wanted Paige's preparations preserved, not hidden. At Sunday dinner, Colin said a short stay might help me decide whether I liked supervised living. Would the stay be temporary? I asked. Paige answered too quickly. Of course, and the house. Nothing would happen until you were comfortable. They believed I was softening. Leah also confirmed the pressure behind their plan. A foreclosure filing had begun against Colin and Paige's house. Colin's small contracting venture carried 2 overdue business loans and a personal guarantee. Their combined obligations did not equal the value of my home, but they were large enough to threaten the life they had been pretending was stable. Does knowing this change your decision? Leah asked. It explains the number. That was not my question. I looked at the copies of the filings. Colin had sat across from me for months and never mentioned any of them. If he had asked for help, I would have listened. Would you have risked the house? No. Then remember that he never gave you the chance to answer. Leah made me write my objective in my own hand and sign the page in front of her. I wanted independent housing, secure retirement funds, lawful removal of the family occupants, and no confrontation before the transaction could no longer be sabotaged. A secret plan can look like incapacity if no one knows why you made it, she said. This file will show the reasons in the order they occurred. She warned me that the sale would take weeks, not days. There would be evaluation, qualified buyers, inspection, title work, notice to the occupants, and a closing contingent on vacant possession. If Colin or Paige challenged my capacity or their notice, we would stop and address it in court. I agreed to every safeguard. Leah's title search arrived at the end of that week. Miriam and I had held the property with survivorship rights. After her death, full title had passed to me. There were no mortgages, liens, leases, life estates, or recorded interests belonging to Colin or Paige. Leah turned the deed toward me and tapped one line. Frank, no one else owns even a single brick. That was when I stopped thinking about how to save the house and started planning how to take it away from them. Sarah Kim entered my house on a Wednesday morning, while Colin and Paige were both at work. She did not begin by praising the staircase or measuring the kitchen. She stood in the front hall, looked at the maple tree through the window, and asked whether I was certain. No, I said, but I am decided. Those are not the same thing. I know. Leah had recommended her because she handled private sales without turning a family crisis into neighborhood entertainment. Sarah agreed to market the property quietly. There would be no sign on the lawn and no public open house. Every potential buyer would be financially qualified, informed that family occupants remained in the home, and told that any sale depended on lawful vacant possession. She spent 2 hours inspecting the house. She noticed the original woodwork, the repaired plaster, the updated wiring I had installed after retirement, and the pantry marks I had protected through 3 paint jobs. At the kitchen table, she placed her valuation in front of me, $890,000. The same number Paige had whispered into her phone. I stared at it until Sarah asked whether I was disappointed. That is exactly what they thought I was worth. She understood without asking who they were. People sell houses every day, she said. You are selling the expectation someone else built on yours. The sale itself was only half the work. The other half was ending Colin and Paige's right to live there. Leah confirmed that they were permitted family occupants without a lease. Local law still required written notice and a defined period to leave. She chose the longer notice available, documented delivery, and included instructions for contesting it. The notice did not accuse them of plotting against me. It said I was changing my living arrangements and terminating their permission to occupy the house on a specific date more than a month away. I handed each of them a copy at breakfast. Colin read the first paragraph and looked up. "What is this?" "Notice that you need to move your household out by the date shown." Paige read more carefully. "Who prepared this?" "My attorney." "You hired an attorney without telling us. I do not need permission to receive legal advice." Colin pushed the notice across the table. "Dad, this is grief talking. The paper explains how to challenge it if you believe that." Paige placed a hand over his before he could respond. Her face changed into the calm expression she used whenever she wanted my disagreement to look like a symptom. "Frank, no one is fighting you. We'll discuss this at the family care meeting after our business trip." Their 32-day trip was scheduled to begin 9 days before the notice period expired. Paige's employer was sending her to supervise a regional office, and Colin planned to join her while meeting suppliers for a new venture. They believed the timing helped them. When they returned, the care consultant and several relatives would be waiting to persuade me to enter Meadow Ridge. They did not file a challenge to the notice. Paige told Colin it would only dignify my panic. Once I had been properly assessed, she said, they could reverse anything I had done. I knew this because she said it in the kitchen while I was in the hallway. They had become careless with doors. They were less careless with relatives. Within 3 days, my niece called to ask whether I had become angry and confused. Paige had told her I was attempting to evict the only people keeping me safe. I asked my niece whether she had seen a medical report saying I was impaired. "No, but Paige sounds worried." "Worry is not evidence. Why would she make it up?" "That is a question you should ask her after the family meeting." I did not reveal the sale. Leah wanted my response to remain simple and verifiable. I was competent. I owned the house, and I had ended permission for 2 adult relatives to live there. Colin tried another approach. He came into my bedroom while I was reading and closed the door. "Dad, if this is about privacy, we can set boundaries. It is printed on the notice. You don't understand what it costs to maintain this place." "I have maintained it for 41 years. That's not what I mean." "Then say what you mean." He looked toward the hallway, where Paige could not hear him. For one moment I thought he might confess the debt and ask for help. "I mean, you need us," he said. He chose control again. "Then the next month will teach us whether that is true." He left believing the sentence referred to their trip. In a way, it did. Over the following weeks, I performed uncertainty. I asked Paige whether Meadow Ridge allowed residents to keep their own furniture. I let Colin explain how selling a large house could reduce my responsibilities. I agreed to place the family care meeting on the calendar for 2 days after they returned. I signed nothing. When Paige showed me a financial power of attorney, I said the print was too small and asked to keep it overnight. Leah copied it before I returned it unsigned. The document granted Paige authority over real estate, accounts, investments, and long-term care decisions. The cover page described it as an emergency convenience. Care without consent is control. Leah said after reading it, the first private viewing happened during a Saturday when Colin and Paige attended a wedding. Sarah brought one couple. They praised the size, talked about removing walls, and asked whether the maple tree could be cut down to make room for a pool. I told Sarah they were not the buyers I wanted. Owen and Priya Dawson visited 4 days later with their 7-year-old daughter, Maya. Owen taught science at a middle school. Priya worked for a medical laboratory. They had been renting a small townhouse while saving for a home with enough space for Priya's mother to live with them. Maya found the pantry marks before anyone showed them to her. "Did a kid grow here?" she asked. "My son did." She placed her back against the frame and asked her father to see which line she reached. Owen apologized. I told him not to. Priya stood beneath the maple tree for several minutes. She asked whether the roots caused trouble near the foundation. I said they had not. Good, she replied. My mother will want a chair under it. They did not speak about the house as an asset. They spoke about where homework would be done, how Priya's mother could use the downstairs bedroom, and whether the dining room could hold 12 people during holidays. Before leaving, Priya touched the red ledger on the kitchen table but did not open it. We are not buying an empty house, Mr. Sullivan, she said. We know someone loved it before us. Their offer was not the highest Sarah believed we could obtain. It was clean, fully financed, and contingent on the title review and lawful vacant possession. I accepted it. Signing the offer made the sale real enough that I needed somewhere to go. The Sara showed me 3 properties. The first was a condominium with elegant hallways and windows that did not open. The second was a small house far from any park or store. The third was the bungalow. Its paint was plain, the garden had been neglected, and one kitchen cabinet hung slightly crooked. I liked it immediately. The main bedroom and bathroom were on the same floor, but no one called that supervision. The second bedroom looked toward the park. A narrow room behind the garage could hold my tools. Children rode bicycles along the path while their parents walked behind them, carrying water bottles and unnecessary advice. I stood at the western kitchen window and imagined the clock losing 4 minutes above the door. Would Miriam have liked it? Sarah asked. She would have complained about the cabinet and then fixed it before I found my screwdriver. For the first time since deciding to sell, the memory made me smile before it hurt. I made an offer contingent on the old house closing. My retirement savings could cover a deposit, and Leah arranged temporary financing so I would never be forced to accept a bad sale merely to complete the purchase. The bungalow gave me an address I had selected for myself. The inspection found an aging water heater, 2 loose roof shingles, and a section of wiring I had somehow missed during my own renovations. Owen did not use the findings to attack the price. We agreed on a reasonable credit. Every document went through Leah. Every signature was witnessed. My capacity assessment, title report, and written instructions remained in the file. The buyers received copies of the occupancy notice and understood that closing would not occur if Colin and Page retained a legal right to possession. Then the title company stopped the file. The notice alone did not prove vacant possession. Colin and Page had not removed their belongings or signed a surrender, and the title company would not insure the transfer while that question remained open. Owen and Priya's mortgage rate lock was approaching its deadline. My bungalow financing also carried a closing date. If the delay lasted too long, I could lose the buyers, the bungalow, or both. Leah refused to let urgency turn into self-help eviction. She prepared a narrow court application, asking only for confirmation that the family license had ended and permission to remove and store the property left behind. How long? I asked. Longer than you want. Shorter than the damage from doing it wrong. By the 5th week, the house was under contract. Colin and Page packed for their trip without understanding why I had begun sorting my belongings too. You're finally taking Meadow Ridge seriously, Page said when she saw labeled boxes in the guest room. I am deciding what comes with me, she smiled. That is all we wanted. The sentence almost made me tell her everything. She looked so satisfied, so certain that my compliance proved her kindness. Then I remembered her explaining how much money would remain after I was deposited. I let her keep smiling. The night before they left, Colin found me beneath the maple tree with the brass key in my hand. What's that? The first key your mother and I received. Does it still work? No, he laughed. Then why keep it? I turned the faded ribbon between my fingers. Your mother kept it. That is enough. He looked at me for a moment, then decided grief had made me philosophical. At the airport the next morning, Paige texted me a photograph of their boarding passes and reminded me about the care meeting. She said the consultant would bring documents that made the transition easy. I wished them a safe flight. The notice period expired 9 days later. Because Colin and Paige had neither vacated nor challenged the notice, Leah presented the deed, proof of service, their occupant status, and the unanswered notice to a judge. The title company kept the closing frozen while we waited. 4 business days later, the court entered a limited possession order, confirming that their license to occupy had ended and authorizing the removal and storage of the belongings they had left behind. There was no long trial and no finding of wrongdoing. The order simply gave Leah the authority the title company required. Only then did licensed movers enter under her supervision. We inventoried every item belonging to Colin and Paige. Furniture was photographed, boxes were numbered, nothing was discarded. Everything went to an insured storage facility with 60 days prepaid. Leah sent instructions to their regular mailing address, email accounts, and the contact information they had provided during the notice period. I did not touch Paige's clothes or Colin's papers. The movers handled them. Once their rooms were empty, I packed the last things I would take: Miriam's photograph, the red ledger, the brass key with the blue ribbon, 2 boxes of tools, 3 kitchen pans, my books, and the clock that still lost 4 minutes every month. I had already purchased a 1-story bungalow near a park using retirement savings and a short-term loan secured against the pending sale. It had 2 bedrooms, a small workshop, and a kitchen window facing west. Leah structured the closing so the loan would be repaid immediately from my proceeds and the remainder would enter my retirement trust. On my last morning in the old house, I walked through every room without pretending the walls could answer me. I touched Colin's height marks. I stood beneath the maple tree and told Chester he was staying with good people. In the kitchen, I read Miriam's note one final time. Never confuse protecting the house with allowing the house to trap you. Then I locked the front door and gave the new key to Sarah. Closing took place in the 9th week after I overheard the conversation. Owen and Priya signed across from me. The title company confirmed that I was the sole owner, the house was free of liens, and the possession order allowed vacant delivery. The money went where I had directed it. The bungalow loan was repaid. Living expenses and future care were funded through the trust. A small education provision remained available if a grandchild ever entered my life. Colin and Paige received none of the proceeds because neither had owned a share. Owen and Priya moved in 12 days before Colin and Paige were due home. Maya's bicycle appeared beside the garage. A new set of curtains went up in the front room. Priya placed a chair beneath the maple tree for her mother. I left one letter in a small glass-fronted box beside the door. It was not a legal notice. Leah had already completed the legal work. It was the explanation I had refused to give before my decision became irreversible. By the time Colin and Paige boarded their flight home, the house was sold. Their belongings were safe in insured storage, and a family they had never met was measuring the rooms they had planned to inherit. Colin and Paige returned on a Thursday afternoon carrying a Meadow Ridge folder. A financial power of attorney and the confidence of people who believed the difficult part was convincing an old man to surrender. I know what happened on the porch because Owen later showed me the doorbell recording. And most of the people standing there repeated the parts the camera could not hear. The care consultant met them in the driveway. 2 relatives arrived minutes later because Paige had described the meeting as a necessary family intervention. She wanted witnesses who already believed I was becoming unsafe. Colin put his key into the front lock. It did not turn. He tried again, pulling the door toward him the way it sometimes required in humid weather. Paige took the key. "You're doing it wrong." Her attempt failed too. He changed the locks. Colin said. Paige looked at the care consultant with an expression that asked her to treat the lock as proof. This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior I told you about. Then the door opened from the inside. Maya Dawson stood in the entrance holding a toy horse. She looked at the group on the porch and called over her shoulder. "Dad, there are people trying our door." Owen appeared behind her. He recognized Colin's name from the occupancy documents and asked Maya to join her mother in the kitchen. "Can I help you?" he said. Colin stared past him. The walls were the same, but the entry rug had changed. A child's jacket hung from the hook where Miriam once kept her gardening hat. "This is my father's house." Owen remained calm. "It was. My wife and I closed 12 days ago." Paige laughed once, sharply. "That is impossible." Sarah Kim handled the sale. Leah Morgan represented Mr. Sullivan. "If you need documentation, you should contact them." Colin stepped toward the threshold. Owen did not move. "My belongings are inside." "No. We took possession of an empty house. The attorney's notice says your belongings were moved to insured storage." The care consultant lowered her folder. "One of my relatives asked Paige whether she had known about a sale." Paige did not answer. She was looking through the front window. A family photograph stood on the side table. Maya's school papers were spread across the living room floor. The curtains were different. A small pair of shoes rested beside the stairs. The house they had divided into debts, fees, and down payments was continuing to live without them. Colin saw the glass-fronted box beside the door. Inside was an envelope bearing his name. Owen removed it and handed it over without inviting anyone inside. Colin opened the letter on the porch. "Colin, you moved into this house because you said I should not be alone. Then you planned to put me somewhere else so the house would be alone for you. You calculated its value at $890,000. You calculated the cost of Meadow Ridge. You calculated what would remain. The only thing you forgot to calculate was that the owner was still alive. The house has been sold. Your belongings are safe in insured storage. Leah Morgan has the details. I have moved somewhere I chose for myself. You wanted me out of the house. You got your wish. You simply forgot the house would leave with me." Dad Colin read the last lines twice. Paige pulled the letter from his hand and searched the back, as though a second page might restore the property. "Call him," she said. "I was eating dinner at my new bungalow when my phone rang. My neighbors, Walter and Denise, had brought soup and bread because my kitchen still held more boxes than plates. The western window was open. I could hear children playing in the park across the street." Colin's name appeared on the screen. I asked Walter and Denise to give me a few minutes, then answered. "Dad, where are you? At home. You sold our house." There was never an hour on the deed. His breath came heavily through the phone. Behind him, I heard Paige speaking to the care consultant and one of the relatives asking what was happening. "You sold it while we were away. I began the process weeks before you left. You received lawful notice. You had instructions for challenging it. You chose not to, because we thought you were having some kind of episode. You thought anything I did without your approval proved I needed your approval." Paige took the phone. "Frank, this has gone far enough. Where are you? We need to see whether you're safe. Safe people are asked where they want to live. We were trying to help you transition into Meadow Ridge." The line went quiet. "Who told you that?" she asked. "You did." At 1:14 on a Tuesday morning, from my study, I heard a small sound from Colin. Not surprised that I knew, but the collapse of his belief that I had been asleep. "I heard the realtor's estimate," I continued. "I heard the entrance fee. I heard what you expected to have after paying your debts. I heard you discuss a power of attorney and the notes you were keeping about my memory." The care consultant asked Paige whether I had consented to the admission inquiry. "No," I answered loudly enough for her to hear. "I did not request an assessment, a transition, or financial supervision." Paige's voice hardened. "Frank doesn't need a 5-bedroom house. He needs supervision. A physician and an independent specialist evaluated me before the sale. My legal capacity was documented. The buyers knew about your occupancy, and a court confirmed that your right to live there had ended. The title was mine alone. Colin took the phone back. You planned this the whole time. I knew what you were planning for me. That was enough. We were going to use the money for your care. After saving your house, clearing the business loans, and making a down payment. We were in trouble. You could have told me. Would you have helped? Perhaps. I might have paid for independent financial advice. I might have helped you negotiate with the lender. I would not have surrendered my home or my legal authority. Now we will never know what I might have offered because you chose calculation instead of conversation. Paige spoke near him. He is punishing us for trying to keep him safe. Your debt explains why my house tempted you, I said. It does not make my dignity negotiable. One of my relatives asked Paige why she had told the family I was unsafe if a doctor had found me competent. The care consultant said her company would close the inquiry and formally record that Paige had submitted it without my authorization. I heard my son breathing into the phone and remembered him calling for me during childhood thunderstorms. Dad, Colin said, quieter now. That house was going to be mine. Eventually is not ownership. It is impatience wearing a family name. Mom wanted me to have it. Your mother wanted you to become someone she could trust with it. Those are not the same thing. You took away my inheritance. You planned an inheritance from a man who was still alive. That was your first mistake. He said nothing. You planned where I would live, as if I had already stopped living. That was the sentence that ended the argument. I gave him Leah's number for the storage facility and told him the first 60 days had been paid. I said future communication about property or money would go through her. Are you cutting me out of your life? He asked. I am removing your control over it. What remains depends on what you do next. Then I ended the call and returned to the table. The soup had cooled. Walter offered to heat it. I said it was fine. My hands were steady, but grief had found a new room inside me. Selling the house had protected my future. It had not restored the son I thought had moved in because he loved me. The following morning, an attorney hired by Paige contacted Leah and suggested the sale might be challenged because I had acted under emotional distress after Miriam's death. Leah sent the capacity assessment, my dated written instructions, proof of independent representation, the title report, the occupancy notices, and the record showing Colin and Paige had declined to contest them. The attorney asked whether I had received fair market value. Sarah supplied the valuation, competing buyer information, inspection report, and financing approval. The price was ordinary. The process was documented. The proceeds had gone into accounts controlled for my benefit. Nothing about the sale depended on humiliating Colin and Paige. That was what made it difficult to attack. Paige's attorney did not file a case. The records ended the challenge before it became a case. The realtor who had given Paige the estimate withdrew when he learned she had no ownership interest. Meadow Ridge closed the file and issued a written correction, stating that I had never been assessed, diagnosed, or admitted, and that Paige's inquiry had been unauthorized. Before I would consider seeing Colin or Paige again, I required them to correct the story they had spread. Colin sent every relative a written statement acknowledging that I had remained competent, had never authorized Meadow Ridge, and had owned the house alone. Paige first sent a letter describing herself as an overwhelmed caregiver. I rejected it. 2 weeks later, she sent a factual correction without excuses. I accepted the correction, not the apology she attached to it. Colin and Paige collected their belongings from storage. They faced the foreclosure and business debts with their own assets. I did not pay them from the sale proceeds. The money remained in my retirement trust, funding the bungalow, my living costs, and whatever care I might choose in the future. My new home was smaller, without feeling like a surrender. Everything was on one floor. The park path began at the end of the street. The second bedroom held a proper bed for guests, and my workshop fit behind the garage. I joined a community gardening group even though Miriam had been the gardener. Denise taught me which herbs could survive my neglect. Walter and I repaired a bench near the park. 3 neighbors began rotating Sunday dinner with me. Colin came to the bungalow 4 months later. He had already sent the written correction. He called first, arrived alone, and met me on the porch. I did not give him a key. He looked thinner. The foreclosure had gone forward. Paige was working additional hours, and their marriage had become a series of arguments about whose idea the plan had been. "It was both of yours," I said when he tried to separate his silence from her decisions. "She designed it. You approved it every time you failed to stop her." He nodded. Inside, he saw Miriam's photograph beside the red ledger. The old brass key lay on the shelf next to the new bungalow key. "Dad, we thought you would be safer. Then you should have asked what safety meant to me. I thought the house would come to me eventually. You were so busy waiting for me to leave it that you forgot I was still living." He apologized without asking for money. That mattered. It did not repair everything. I asked him what he believed he was apologizing for. "For talking about the house like you were already gone," he said. "And for letting Paige arrange Meadow Ridge without asking you. For agreeing that we could use the money. For calling your refusal confusion because I did not want to hear it. It was not a perfect confession." He still spoke of Paige as the person who arranged the plan, but he had begun naming his own choices inside it. "Your mother and I helped you whenever we could," I said. "You mistook a history of help for a permanent right to decide what I owed you." "I know." "Then show me after this conversation." I told him there would be no financial authority, no shared home, and no private access to my records. If we rebuilt a relationship, it would happen through ordinary actions repeated long enough to become trustworthy. He began calling once a week. "Sometimes," I answered. He helped Walter and me repair the park bench, but left when the work was done instead of finding a reason to inspect my files. At Christmas, he brought no brochures, forms, or advice. I did not call it forgiveness yet. One evening, I opened Miriam's ledger to the final page. Then I placed the brass key with its faded blue ribbon beside the bright new key to the bungalow. Miriam and I had spent 41 years paying for one house. It took one night to understand I did not owe the rest of my life to its walls. They wanted the property. I chose the life that was still mine. They returned expecting to inherit my home. What they found was proof that I had finally chosen to keep my life. Was I wrong to sell the house without confronting my son first? Or did Colin lose the right to an explanation when he began planning my life around an inheritance that was not his?